Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick. We're here to continue our Recollections series today. And today we're talking about an all-time favorite Raven, Shannon Sharpe. Just 2 years with the Ravens, but he's in the Ravens Ring of Honor. Sean Asher selected him to talk about. Sean, how you doing?
I'm good, Ken. How you doing today, man?
Really appreciate you coming on, as always, Sean. But why Shannon Sharpe?
So I was born in 91. My grandfather was a longtime Colts fan. And then when they dispersed, he was not going to the DC team. So he was, just became a Navy football fan for a long time. Then when Baltimore came to town, he started watching, got me into it. And I guess I remember just the general excitement around getting Shannon Sharpe because I was like 5 years old, so don't remember a ton, but remember that. And then pretty confident that 2000 season, it was the first Ravens jersey I got was Shannon Sharpe. I think it was 2000. It may have been 2001 after Hard Knocks, but I think it was the 2000 season. So Shannon Sharpe always has a special spot in my heart, regardless of whatever he says on his podcast nowadays.
He is kind of a wild card. He can say a lot of things. I don't think he's ever really malicious with the Ravens intentionally. I think he's just speaking his mind, and that's pretty much what he's done his entire life in a good way. Played ages 32 and 33 for the Ravens. You don't expect to get much out of a player at that point, but he honestly gave the Ravens a much needed receiving threat at a time when they had Qadry Ishmael, but not much else. Yeah,
I mean, and I can't remember too much about why they brought him in because it's not like Twitter was a thing. It's not like you can go back and, even like Baltimore Sun, I think in like 2014 started taking all their old historical articles and putting them on. So like you can find some of the articles about signing some players from back then and, big moves like when Banks got benched and Dilfer got the nod. You can find an article about that, but even then it's still pretty hard. But yeah, just going back and looking at the depth chart, Qadry Ishmael was kind of really it. And then, obviously we had a great running game, but outside of Qadry, there really wasn't that much there.
Yeah, and that's certainly true. They tried to take a swing with Patrick Johnson in the second round. That really didn't work out for the Ravens. And they had long gone were Jackson and Alexander, who were the great Ravens receivers of their first season. Jermaine Lewis was still around and still contributing a little bit on the offensive side, but mostly at this point had been converted to a return man. So it was Sharpe. And I remember on that 2000 Super Bowl video, one of the things that Trent Dilfer said was, we had a little talk and we said, if the ball has to go to Shannon Sharpe every time, it's going to go to Shannon Sharpe every time. If rather than me trying to force the football to other different players.
Yeah. I mean, Patrick Johnson pops up a few times in Shannon Sharpe highlights because he blocks really well for Shannon Sharpe downfield. But I mean, it's not really a great pass catching threat to, distribute targets around.
32 games with the Ravens, 6 more in the regular season, 6 more in the postseason. So he was healthy for every game he was here in Baltimore. That's always nice. The Ravens, of course, went 5-1 in those 2 seasons without only that loss at Pittsburgh to think about for the you glasses half empty people. But that Super Bowl run was really something special. I'm sure we'll talk about that. His career at Denver before he got there and after, by the way, because he went back to Denver to finish out his days. He might have played for one other team too, but he played most of his years with Denver. 8,439 yards and 55 TVs with Denver, and 7 Pro Bowls and 4 All-Pro ones. He was kind of the tight end of the 1990s. And it's interesting that the Ravens also picked up Ben Coates for that 2000 season, who a very honorable dude in a way. First of all, came in, didn't play a whole lot of snaps. And what were your recollections about Ben Coates? I don't want to steal the.
There's a play that we're going to get to. We're going to talk about that play. But yeah, I mean, that's really it, and I'm looking at the name and I'm looking at the statistics and I got nothing, man. I got nothing on Ben Coates.
All right. Well, a couple things. I mean, he had 3 catches in the Super Bowl, and Shannon only had 1. And one of them was a nice long, I think about a 30-yard play in that Super Bowl. But he only had 18 targets with 9 receptions in that 2000 season during the regular season. So he had, in a lot of ways, he did more in the postseason, did the whole regular season. Didn't play a whole lot of snaps. And he retired before the 2001 season with his ring. So Super Bowl 35 was his last game in the NFL, and 499 career catches, when 500 actually used to mean something at that point.
Yeah.
So he was, like Mr. 29.99, running the ice cream truck. He's in a good place.
Especially 500 for a tight end back then.
Yep.
Wow. That's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
All right. Well, back to Sharpe a little bit. What do you remember about him in terms of his general way he carried himself on the field?
So, I mean, there was the trash talk, right? So like there was jarring, and it's like it was different. He was such a unicorn for the position at the time, because like the tight ends, we were shifting, the NFL as a whole was kind of shifting from, tight ends just being 75% of an offensive line, but meant to be more athletic and just be able to get onto the second level and get blockers, so they can't be as big as offensive line. And you had pass catching tight ends, Kellen Winslow, obviously Ozzie Newsome, like you had a bunch of pass catching tight ends, but the way Shannon Sharpe moved was not like a tight end. It was the movement of a wide receiver, but in the body of a tight end. And it was just pure athletic ability for a man of that size. It was like, to me, of course it was not something I had seen, but apparently a lot of the country hadn't seen something like that either. So I really remember a lot of just like making linebackers look absolutely silly, and how do you even defend that?
Yeah, it's a great point, because he was too big for linebackers to cover. Too athletic for linebackers to cover, and too big for a safety, and certainly for a corner to cover. So very, very hard matchup to work with, and one the Ravens were willing to exploit regularly. I remember him as being, I think, much more of a vertical threat than we think of him today. And Isaiah Likely is a better athlete than Shannon Sharpe was. But Isaiah Likely is similar in terms of his ability to get deep behind a defense and still work for a contested catch and whatnot. Shannon, I think, is more of a hands catcher, generally speaking, away from the body, did not have a lot of problems with trapping the ball on the inside and having bad things occur from that, or ball bouncing off his chest a lot. And also being a guy who could box out like a great tight end is supposed to be able to do. Really knew how to position his body to keep that the defender from getting near that football.
I like the Isaiah Likely somewhat comparison, but also like Isaiah Likely playing in the 2000s. I don't know,
unbelievable.
Lasted a season, like just the hits, back then. But Shannon Sharpe was so much bigger, and just like, he could hit. You could get hit. He could take the hits, I guess. Yeah. And I mean, maybe Likely could. I don't know. I cannot imagine some of those linebackers from back then, and and some of the safeties back then either. I mean, I couldn't imagine it, but maybe.
So. You mentioned you were born in 91, right? You said, okay, so you were 9 in 2000, or you turned 9 sometime during that year. So how much of the Ray Lewis trial information do you still recall? Because I do recall Shannon Sharpe having a part in that.
So a decent amount. I guess my grandmother was a French teacher at Annapolis High School, and we didn't really grow up on the different side of town that was like, he did it, he's a murderer, how dare he, we didn't really have that mindset in our family. And it was just more of like, we didn't really know what to think. Like, the news said that he was there, and then like people were saying that he did it, but nobody that had any credible sources or anything said that he did it. So it was just a lot of like, I guess at elementary age, I'm getting a prep for the 2016 election or whenever it was, about how news consorts things and how the world just like operates that way, and like you have to think for yourself. But I don't really remember it being like in my family or our lives like super polarizing or anything, because it was just like we don't really know what happened.
Well, I'm glad. I think a lot of Ravens fans are at least happy and probably got a little bit of an education about our legal system during that time that I think was good. About, first of all, innocent till proven guilty. Let's start with that. And I think in the end, Ray is all the way admitting he was there. That's not the question, of course. And it's not the question that he got rid of his suit and whatnot. I think that some of the obstruction of justice lands from that. He, in the end, testified in terms of what he could see, but he apparently had not seen much. And it does seem like, it's certainly a tragedy in terms of what happened. But Ray certainly paid the price in terms of a great deal of notoriety that time. It really was about 3 years before he was back on any sort of advertising after that. Really, the 2003 draft is when I started to see him coming up again. And, but I want to talk about Sharpe's involvement in the thing, because in a lot of ways, I think Shannon went to Ray, first of all, and one is one of the people who was not trying to distance himself, not trying to seem like he was not on Ray Lewis's side, or not take a neutral stance, or saying things that Twitter didn't exist then, but saying this will play out and I hope justice is served, and we await the decision of the jury, or anything like that. He went and he worked out with Ray while this was going on. And I think it's very evident by the time we get to Hard Knocks the next year what a great relationship these two guys had in the locker room. And you see them at the talent show for the rookies, and they're both getting made fun of, and these guys are like ribbing each other and nudging each other in the back row like they've known each other for 20 years.
Yeah, in prep for this, I went back and rewatched Hard Knocks, and it was funny to see just the individual personalities between Ray and Shannon. And Shannon's like, he's at that point in his career where he knows everything, and he's just waiting for the tight ends coach, whoever it was at the time, to say, okay, you can get out of here. Let me teach Todd Heap this thing, but his goal is like, I've won my rings, I'm going into the Hall of Fame, whatever. But his mindset seemed to be of like, I'm having fun while I can still do this. And Ray's mindset, and like he talks about, I just enjoy being on the field with these guys. I don't care what Shannon says and how he tries to get under my skin and make jokes at my expense. I just enjoy playing the game. And it was like, just because it's year 4 for him or year 5 for him at that point. So it was interesting to see from that type of perspective how those two iconic players and their mentalities at that moment in their careers are so very different, and the greatness isn't that much different.
The juxtaposition with Tony Siragusa is also something. I think as much as they each had their moments in this back and forth kind of jokey, practical joke stuff they were doing with each other, and some of the things Shannon said though during that time about demanding restitution and this sort of thing, I thought that was just something that I think probably cemented his ability to have a long broadcasting career, which, by the way, I think would have happened anyway. But he certainly, got a lot more nibbles on the line probably because
initially,
of what happened on that show.
As you say that, I'm wondering if Marlon Humphrey's going to be, we're going to see
probably,
him, right? Because all the podcasting he's doing now and like prepping himself for whenever that day comes. Hopefully it's another decade down the future, and we have lots of all pros from him in the meantime. But it's a very valid point, for sure.
Siragusa himself got a fair amount of time. He's still the only sideline reporter that I've ever seen who was free to cut in at any time. It's like he's in the booth. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have to run you weren't worried about him to the same degree that you were with not Montana, Namath, when he's like on the sideline, he's like hitting on Tracy Colbert because he's, blackout, or was Susie Colbert because he's blackout drunk, like on the sideline. Yeah, you never like Goose knew where that line was. He never went above that line.
All right. How about some of Shannon's great highlights as a Raven? What are the ones you remember?
Ooh, okay. Let me get into that list. Sorry. So I think Jacksonville week 2, as I went back and looked at it from 2000 week 2 with Jacksonville, like Jacksonville had a squad, man. Mark Brunell, like that was a pretty good, solid quarterback. Fred Taylor was a 1,400-yard rusher and big name running back at the time, pretty elusive guy. Keenan McCardell and Jimmy Smith both were 1,000-yard receivers, and I feel like at the time, like Jacksonville kind of had our number for years before that, and it wasn't like, everybody today, I'm sure, thinks of Jacksonville and like outside the one blip of Blake Bortles, the one season, it's like kind of been a laughing stock for a long time, but back then they weren't. And at the end of the game there, Shannon Sharpe just got open for the touchdown, and it was Tony Banks. Like it was such an awful first half, and the way they came back in the second half, defense started putting the clamps down, and at the end of the game, sure enough, it's Shannon Sharpe that, week 2 of the regular season, like Shannon Sharpe pops up and is the Hall of Fame playmaker that he has proven to be.
Yeah, right. It's an odd pass, but definitely one of the ones that it leads to more Shannon Sharpe as a vertical threat. I mean, right down the seam for a 29-yard touchdown, catches it at about the 1, falls into the end zone of a defender that's much smaller than him, which is perfect in a lot of ways. Touchdown reminds me a lot of the Todd Heap game-winning touchdown against the Chargers in 2006. So there's a similar amount of time left. I think it might have been 30 seconds or 39 seconds left in that Chargers game, and he bulls over Sean Merriman into the end zone. It's just a kind of a similar memory to me. The other thing I remember hearing about it afterwards, in terms of the way of Sharpe being interviewed, is that he went to Banks in the huddle and said, "Look, I don't care what the play is. I want the football." And so he's not going to be denied at this point. And Banks had a pretty good drive, a couple of 2nd down and 10 conversions to Billy Davis of all people. He only caught 3 balls the whole year, but 2 of them were 2nd and 10 conversions on that drive against Jacksonville. So it was a good drive, to get into range there. A good job of not scoring too quickly, also, because I think that could have been tough. But they got it done, and Shannon wouldn't be denied there.
Yeah, definitely a great highlight about the zone coverage and, being able to get in that second level between linebackers and safeties and it was just so unheard of in the NFL at that time for a tight end to be able to move and catch like that. Like it just, epitomized like Shannon Sharpe as a player for sure.
I got one more before the 2000 postseason, but if you have anything else, go ahead with another highlight from anything else in the 2000 season.
I don't think I have anything else from the 2000 regular season. There was a game with Cincinnati that he popped off. Yeah. Is that the one you're, yeah.
It is actually, because the Ravens had a 20-quarter scoring drought that was broken earlier in that game by Stokely's touchdown.
Yep.
And then Shannon had 2 other touchdowns he added on top, and what ended up being a 27-7 laugher, and got that Ravens team back on track. Let's see. They won the previous week. Now, I think that was their first win of the 11 in a row to finish the regular season and then the postseason as well.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, he went off in that game. And there was, like, all of it was impressive for that game. But yeah, there wasn't anything that like super stood out in my mind from that game. But yeah, he had a field day that game. It just seemed like he was a man amongst boys the entire game. Yep.
And I'm sure we have a lot of the same highlights from the 2000 postseason, but talk us through them.
So I'll start with the wild card round one because that one was just immaculate. Like that was a wild play, and I, I don't remember. Like I went back and watched a bunch of games from that 2000 season to prep for this, and like I just don't really remember seeing a lot of two tight ends out wide in the same play. But for whatever reason, that's the play call. There's two tight ends, Ben Coates, who we talked about earlier, and Shannon Sharpe out wide on the right side. It's a short flat, like maybe 3 or 4 yards out, and Ben Coates has it in his hands, but I couldn't tell if he's getting popped because it's standard definition and it's probably a VCR recording, but I couldn't tell if he's getting hit or if he just like kind of juggled it and like it got up in the air. Shannon Sharpe just kind of pops out of nowhere, grabs it, runs around that interaction. Somebody, I think it was Romanowski, takes a bad angle and then gets absolutely lit by a gash, and then Shannon Sharpe down the sideline like 60 yards for the touchdown.
Yeah, it was a special play. I thought it was Jamal Lewis who touched the ball initially on that flat, but I might be wrong about that. It might have been Coates. I got to go back and watch that again because it's been so long. But my recollection also is that Romanowski was the second toucher. Sharpe catches it going in the wrong direction, then takes a U-turn back upfield for that touchdown. It's just one of the really weird plays. It's hard for me to believe it's been 24 years, almost 23, I guess, and change. But there's a lot of Ravens fans, I think, some of the younger generation who probably has not seen that play. And
probably,
it's something that I hope we're still seeing it. But the more we get into the high def era, you mentioned this earlier, the more people choose highlights from the high def era that they're not willing to go back to before 2006 when high def was much rarer. And they may not even have the recordings stashed in the same way. I know that the NFL used to keep them back to about 2009. I don't know what they have deep in their digital vaults, but that's what they were offering up for a long time.
I saw somewhere that now you can go back to about like 2004 or 5 for most regular season, postseason stuff. But yeah, I don't pre that. Like I don't know how you find it, and I guess I don't really understand just watching highlights. I mean, I guess I do because it's like the way society's going, like the more retweets and likes or whatever you get, then that's more important, more dopamine, serotonin, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. For me, I've always been a big fan of the players that like just do the little things and it doesn't really like their greatness doesn't really matter how much I like them based off of just how well they do all the little things. So, current favorite Raven is Patrick McCary. And it's like, it's weird, but it's like the dude just grinds and it's, his technique is always seems pretty solid. Like he gets beat for sure, but it seems like he's always trying to do the right thing. So yeah, I don't know. To me, I'm not a highlight
guy. That's a good profile. That's a good profile. I want the full games too, for a lot of reasons, obviously, but that is something that I'm interested to know that those HD games are out there going further back. I know even when the entire rest of the league had converted to HD in 2006, Cleveland had not. And so they didn't have cameras that went back to the 06 and I believe the 07 games either. But in 08, they finally got HD, I believe. And they were the last of the 32 original teams holding out still. This HD fad is just going to go away. We're not going to splurge on cameras for this. But anyway, I would I frequently go to my collection and enjoy rewatching some of these games. I was going to do a series on just my own thoughts rewatching games, something I could do solo in about 15 or 20 minutes and talk about it. The only one I ended up doing so far this offseason was the 1996 opener, but it'd be a fun thing to go through.
The last game with Dallas at their last stadium, I'd want to hear that one from you for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right, that would be one.
I'm putting it on the list.
We blew the doors off of them, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Two longest runs in team history, in opponent history. At that stadium were in the last 3 minutes. So
yeah, I'd be interested because there's a lot of context about Dallas at the time too that I probably would have forgotten and wouldn't remember. Yeah, that would be a good one.
Well, let's move on to talk about the Titans and Ravens, and obviously that was the game of the 2000 playoffs. Anywhere, anytime, that was the game that determined the Super Bowl actually.
Yeah.
And Sharpe had pretty much the entire offense for the Ravens in a single play that day.
Correct. Yep. And it just like blown coverage. I don't know. Like it. Who do they have to cover? Like, what are you guys paying attention to if it's not Shannon Sharpe? And like, just blown coverage and so much just like goosebumps and like fear and like I remember that game, and I remember the anxiousness in the room was more palatable than the Colts in 07. Is that when it was? Yeah. The anxiousness in that room amongst the Ravens fans was the most anxious I've ever felt Ravens fans around me in my entire life. And it was, the missed kicks, the return kicks, the blocked kicks. I mean, it was so much, but yeah, one play. And I mean, what Shannon Sharpe did that play wasn't even like wildly impressive. It was just a complete blown coverage, and somehow he ends up going 60 something yards. I think he got tackled at the 1, right?
I think you might be right. It might have been the 3, but either way, he put them in position where they almost couldn't mess it up. And then they had one really well blocked play for Jamal Lewis to get in the end zone. Yep. And that was nice, but that was pretty much the whole offense the entire day. Other than that, I think they only had 5 first downs in the game.
Sounds
and their big play in the second half was a good punt return that set them up at about their own 47 or something, or maybe even the Titans 45. Then they got a 14-yard run out of Jamal, which was like their last first down of the game, I believe. And then they kicked the field goal that got the game tied at 10. And of course, then you move forward, and then from tied at 10, it's block kick return 90 yards by Mitchell, and the interception to seal it returned by Ray Lewis on the play. They, for whatever reason, they show that Ray Lewis highlight a lot more. It was a critical play in Ravens history, but it's so far down in terms of the relative importance to the block kick and return, which was to that point on the 1 to 10 scale. It was the only 11 in Ravens history to that point. There's no other. Really, the Lewis play is a 10, but there really aren't any other 10s either.
Correct.
It still bothers me that play isn't held in that high regard.
McCrary, right? He's the one that blocked the kick. That
Keith Washington.
Keith Washington.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And
he blocked them both. Actually, blocked both field goals.
I couldn't say I watched the first block or miss like 5 times, and I just couldn't tell if he got his fingers on it. Okay, he did. Yeah, Washington.
I've got this really cool network feed of that game in my collection, and it has instead of going to commercial, they just stick with the announcers. And so one of the funny things is happening. They're teasing the sideline announcer. I don't remember, it was Susie Colbert or some other fairly young woman, and they're teasing her about some party she went to, as if it's an inside joke or whatever. And then there's another at the point of the block field goal. It all happens so quickly. Mitchell's running it back, and they said, "There's Anthony Mitchell, playing his 29th game of the season. He played for the Rhine Fire and this and that. And he goes in the end zone." But basically, that's Enberg reading off his little square everything he knows about Anthony Mitchell there in one sentence.
Yep.
There's number. Let's see, 42. Yes, that's Anthony, right? Yes, okay. So anyway, the other thing is, you really got a sense into just how technical Dan Deerdorf was. And I had brought this up on the show before, but I'll risk saying it again, is that he immediately is like he's directing the truck in terms of the review. He goes, okay, give me the all 22, go to field level. Okay, go back, run it back again, run it back forward. They go, okay, that's Keith Washington. And immediately they come back from commercial. And he goes, And Keith Washington here on this play, you'll see loses his helmet, but doesn't lose his head, as he's the one who blocks this kick that gets rid of. And it's just so smooth. And if you ever didn't like Deerdorf, the announcer, which I always loved his energy, I really loved who he was as an announcer. I know there's been some times when Baltimore fans have been a little bit upset with him, but you just couldn't help but respect the guy for who he was in terms of his analysis of football and his technical ability with the assets that they had available to them.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, it's like watching a conductor for the symphony at the Kennedy Center. Like, how do you hear all of these pieces and know exactly how to keep it all balanced? And that's wildly impressive for sure. Yep.
We go on to the AFC Championship game. I'm sure there's a play you want to talk about there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Like, that's another one that it's just wild to me how Shannon Sharpe in that 2000 season is like, he's just the guy. And it just, like, it doesn't matter what other pieces are falling apart around him or how unlucky or how ill queued up everything is for him. He just happens to be that dude. It's like Marlon Brown, this Viking snowpocalypse game. It's like, but for Shannon Sharpe, it's the whole 2000 season. So yeah, way backed up, and I think it's third down. They're trying to get
third and 18 from the 4.
Yeah, third and 18, 4 from the 4, and Shannon Sharpe has an interview for the Ravens 20th season where they talk about top 20 plays from their previous 20 years, and that play is one of them. He says that the entire goal of that play was to get more room to punt. So, and it looks like he's running a slant, over the middle, and it, like, he's covered. Like, this window doesn't really exist, and it's probably not a good ball for Trent Dilfer to throw. I'm not discrediting him because I've never been in the NFL quarterback, and me reading the field is not going to be as good as Trent Dilfer for sure. But like, from my amateur analyst I guess, I'm like, that's a bad throw for sure. Shouldn't throw that ball. But somehow, like, Shannon Sharpe has half of a quarter of a step on double coverage and catches it, and it's a little, like, it's on him. It's not in front of him. It's not behind it, but it's like it's right in the pocket. It's right at his armpit, trying to catch this thing, and then sprints all the way down the field. And I think he got a block from Stokely, right?
It might have been. I was thinking that Patrick Johnson was running with him.
Patrick Johnson was the Broncos one.
Okay.
I know that one.
I take your word for it. So it might be Stokely.
I think it was Stokely on that one.
I'll take your word for it. I've got to watch these plays again. Now I've got a real hankering to do it. But the thing I remember is Marquez Pope, who was the safety for the Raiders, kind of pulled his hand back. Raiders fans will never forgive him for that. In fact, they're probably more mad at Marquez Pope than they are at Tony Siragusa for what he did in that game, which is pretty. It's a lot. And then he pulls his hand back, and I think, we always talk about running backs and how, they either can or they can't run away from defenses. And it's usually a matter of being, just a tiny bit faster. It's one of the few places your long speed really comes in. But the fact that Shannon Sharpe was able to go the distance there really says a lot about Shannon Sharpe, the athlete, because he was fast enough to get it done in a place like that.
And you said this was year 8?
He was 32 years old at the time.
Yeah. And like, for as great as medical treatment and injuries and surgeries were in 2000 and the 2001, like, it still was like, to be able to make it 8 years and still be that athletic and be 32 and be able to do that, like, that's, I don't know. The last tight end at 32 that would have been able to do that, maybe Tony Gonzalez, but probably not at 32. I can't.
Defenders have gotten a lot faster, including the linebackers who would have been chasing him down. So, I really don't know. I mean, but oftentimes it's said of a running back who has like 4.47 speed doesn't run away from defenses. Kind of think, oh, really?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's just incredible that, again, it's another play of Shannon Sharpe in that postseason that's akin to the Steelers with the miracle. I can't remember the guy's
the immaculate reception.
The immaculate reception, where it's just like how does that happen? And then I'm like psychologically thinking about Ray Lewis and how deep he is and with his religion and his higher power, and I'm like, dude, if I saw Shannon Sharpe do that in 2000, I'd be a believer too. Like, if I'm next to this and all this stuff happens, yeah, man, holy cow, wow,
Great game, obviously, and he only had one catch for 5 yards in the Super Bowl, so I don't expect you to have a highlight from that. The 2001 highlight, the only one I've got, is the game-winning touchdown against Jacksonville with 9 seconds left. It was a tough season all the way around, obviously, for the Ravens, and there wasn't a lot for him to be heroic about. Certainly not nearly as much, but a well-earned, I think, and in a lot of ways, he's kind of set a standard for a guy who played 2 years of extremely high-value play for the Ravens, and I think the biggest thing being the 5-1 record they had in the playoffs with him helped him get in the Ring of Honor for the Ravens.
Yeah, that Jacksonville catch was like just another, like, we've been talking about his size and his speed and like how uncomparable he is, but that catch was like Jerry Rice body control for a tight end. Obviously it's not the same, but like as far as tight ends go, like you just don't see a dude be able to like extend out past the back of the end zone, catch the ball, and keep his feet down as a tight end. You just didn't really see that.
I'm sorry here, I need to correct myself. Hey, Shannon Sharpe is one of the initial 5 Ravens to go into the Hall of Fame. He is actually not in the Ravens Ring of Honor.
Really?
Yeah, I'd say they've got a lot of guys who have a 4-year run or something that includes a great postseason, like Anquan Bolden and Matt Burke would be in that category of having a great 4-year run. I think what will have to happen maybe for some of them to make it is the Ravens will have to have a down period where they don't win for a couple of decades. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because this town, I don't know if we can take it after all the success we've had. So I know it'd be difficult to take, but anyway, if something like that happened, we've seen how the Oriole Hall of Fame can get crowded with some pretty mediocre players under such circumstances, and the Ravens still have a good supply line, or what do you call it, pipeline of players who did a lot for them.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, I think as long as Steve Bisciotti is around, like as long as he's here and coherent, like I think we're in pretty good hands, right? I think I remember reading or hearing somewhere that he doesn't want to pass it on to his kids, so at some point in time the team will sell. And like, I don't know, we've watched Carolina go to new ownership, and that was God. I've got a couple
Scary.
Panthers friends that are just like, I'm like, that's brutal, man. I don't even, I feel so awful for you guys. This is really brutal. But yeah, as long as Bisciotti's around, I feel like we're okay. We don't have to worry about the downturn.
All right. Well, Sean, I tell you what, absolutely a delight to talk through some of these great moments with Shannon, about Shannon Sharpe. But tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I am on Twitter, like rarely though, because it's just a toxic place, man. And like, I try not to be on Twitter a ton because the toxicity, but I'm there at BMORE_sky SKY_high HIGH. And I've had that for a while, but yeah, I'm there. There's my picture's some like alternate created Ravens uniform that I saw that's like Maryland flag inspired. I was like, that's dope. So yeah, if you see some random cool jersey that's like not real, then that's me.
All right. Well, very cool. Sean, I really appreciate you coming on. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up with a DM. They're always open on Twitter. In particular, if you have a player you want to talk about, doesn't have to be the 38 minutes of memories we've gone over here about Shannon Sharpe. It could be 15 of some player maybe who was lesser known, but you have fond memories of a personal interaction, whatever it might be. Just DM me his name. and I will save that player for you, and we'll schedule as soon as we can for doing that, probably in June at this point. But Sean, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Ken, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it as always.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.